amazed at the speed with which this year has gone by. And I think, oh no, September's right around the corner. And September is kind of like the catalyst for the rocket that takes off to the end of the year. And so I'm not quite ready for the rocket takeoff yet, so I'm glad to be still in August. But that means it's summertime when people come and go. We just had some people come back from vacation, others are on vacation, and so there's a break from the regular routine. And sometimes there's even more possibility to sit in Stau than you ever had before. Backed up traffic, Stau, is backed up traffic. I had to kind of have an experimental run coming down yesterday, even from Stuttgart. It all went well, but I take a different angle because there's roads that are blocked, construction work going on. And then as I got towards Engen, there was a backed up traffic, and I thought the last time I saw backed up traffic, there was a accident, so I took a turn off, went around Zingen. So it's an interesting mix of things in summertime. It's pleasure on the one hand, and yet when people think of vacation, you certainly didn't want to be among those who went to Hawaii this year, or to Slovenia, or to Austria, or to any of the other places where there's been flood and fire. And I even saw in Norway there was flooding. It wasn't big in the news, but I saw all the rushing water. It looked like the same water that was rushing in Slovenia. The same kind of destruction. So it's not exactly like you can just pick your favorite summer spot and go off and all is good. Not this year. Not this year. One doesn't know what will come next. But yet for the most of us, summer is also a bit of the same. Pretty much the same every day. With minor changes here and there. And the other question is, does our faith ever take a break in summertime? It's not like we take a vacation from God, or do we? This temptation to take a break, a faith break, is probably a Western one. Or at least it suggests that faith is an on and off thing. If I'm in church, it's on. If I'm not in church, it's off. Sometimes it's on more intensely, sometimes it's off more intensely. And looking into our world, the majority of the people on the planet are not thinking about vacation. They're thinking about survival. I think that's a good thing to think about when we're frustrated by Stau or backed up traffic or. Most of the people on the planet don't have vacation thoughts, they have survival thoughts. And I was thinking too, I read that solidarity is Jesus' strategy for justice. And so Jesus always looked at the situation from the bottom up and not from the top down. I thought this was significant when you even look at some of the discussions about climate change. I was looking at some of the people that drive the delivery trucks in Arizona, for example. The brown trucks that always deliver good things if you ordered something. And they don't have any air conditioning in their vans. It gets to be 135 degrees in there. And many of them begin to have kidney problems, and some even die. And you kind of go like, why is that? Because the company is looking from the top down. Profit, it's called, rather than from the bottom up. They're workers. I find that is an interesting thing. This is kind of a little extra sermon in the real sermon this morning. But it reminds us that in the view that God has on things, we always need to think what's happening down here. Where does Jesus want a vision of solidarity with those who are looking up and not just those who are looking down? In this season, then, there's potentially people who feel faith issues are sometimes on and off. So I was asking myself, what should I tell the community in the month of August? What can we focus on that will help us in this on and off feel when everybody's coming and going? And several verses in Hebrews caught my attention, chapter 10, verses 23 through 25, and I want to focus on this and only on one verse, but here's all three verses. Hebrews 10, 23 to 25. Let us hold tightly without wavering to the hope we affirm, for God can be trusted to keep his promises. Let us think of ways to motivate one another to acts of love and good works. And let us not neglect our meeting together, as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near. The writer of the Hebrews, if you read the book, and it's not that long, has actually shown how significant it is that Jesus has come into the lives of these people. Jesus has turned everything upside down for the better. Jesus gave his life and shed his blood, and therefore they have a direct access to the very presence of God. Who would ever have thought of that possibility? Nobody before Jesus really came. In the last times I've preached since Pentecost, and I've preached a number of times here in the last month, we've learned about living in resonance with God. I think that's something we need to remember because it's a possibility since Jesus came. It's resonance, contact, connection, ongoing dialogue, potential, all because Jesus came. And that's what these Hebrew Christians were beginning to learn. And the challenge is always to keep the awe and wonder of this privilege alive. We can fall into sort of a ho-hum kind of feel about our faith, when actually it should be like dynamite every week. Do you feel like dynamite every week in your faith? Probably not if we're honest, but this resonance with God is dynamic stuff, and we shouldn't lose the awe and wonder. And so I doubt that these early Christians there were any different than we are, other than the circumstances were different. But the temptation to lose the original dynamic of the awesome connection of God with God through Jesus is there for every generation. It was for these folk as well. And therefore the author here says, let us. It's kind of like a commando. Now. Stay on it. Don't lose the awe. Stay on track. And the struggles that these early Christians faced included persecution. I mean, for us to keep the awe and wonder, we're doing it in a pretty luxurious situation. We have enough to eat. No one's threatening us particular. We have dumb stuff to go through because it's life, but we're not threatened all the time. We know that there are a number of Christians, our brothers and sisters, even now who are being threatened. In India in particular, we've heard some graphic descriptions of persecution, a direct hit. And so these verses in 32 through 34 say, think back on those early days when you first learned about Christ. Remember how you remained faithful, even though it meant terrible suffering. Sometimes you were exposed to public ridicule and were beaten. And sometimes you helped others who were suffering the same things. You suffered along with those who were thrown into jail. And when all you owned was taken away from you, you accepted it with joy. I was thinking of the song we sang. Did you hear that part? When all that I have, I've given up all for you. They had a literal taking away of everything. It's kind of like if you were in one of the situations in our world right now where the flood just goes whoosh, and all that you had before is gone. The writer here says, you accepted this loss with joy. You knew there were better things waiting for you that will last forever. So now do not throw away this confident trust in the Lord. Don't throw it away in the tough times. And with this background in mind, our verse for the day has deep significance. Let us hold tightly, without wavering, to the hope we affirm, for God can be trusted to keep his promise. Yes, let us hold tightly. Hang on tight. In this verse, we see the basis for hope. Despite all challenges, God can be trusted to keep his promise. Do we really believe that? The promises God has given us, and some of you have received probably personal promises. Do you believe that God can keep his promise? If you do, you have hope. If you doubt that, you begin to go down the tubes a bit. It's a slide, like a wet slide in the summer at the park. Michael Eaton writes, hope is faith that looks ahead. It is faith that anticipates that one will be rewarded by events which will take place later. And complementing this, another one said that we hold on to hope as an anticipation that the promise given to Abraham would be fulfilled in the days of the readers because of Jesus' sacrifice. Some of these Hebrew believers were thinking now the promises given to Abraham will be fulfilled. So in the midst of their challenge, the question and the thrust of the Hebrew writer was, hold on tight. Hold on tight. Don't loosen your grip. I've seen people play golf. I'm not a golfer. I messed around with a golf ball and some clubs when I was a young person. My cousin and I used to slip onto a golf course where you could kind of go and do a little bit of free stuff. It's the same you could do a little bit of playing tennis free back then. I don't think you can do it anymore. But we used to knock a few golf balls. But, you have to hold on tight to if you loosen your grip on the, what is that called? Club, there you go. If you loosen your grip on the club, you're not going to hit the ball very well. Hold on tight. As I was thinking about all of these 3 verses, and this first verse in particular, I was thinking about the chapter 11 that follows chapter 10, where all the people of faith are listed. And I wondered, did the writer of Hebrews list all these people to help the Hebrews to understand, the Hebrew believers to understand these 3 verses? Did it say like actual people have held on to the promises without the fulfilling presence of Christ? And if they could do it and they looked forward and that enabled them to stay firm in the present, wouldn't that be a good possibility for all of you? I'm sure the Hebrew writer was thinking that. And I'm thinking of, isn't that a good idea for all of us? And even before Abraham, the father of faith, there was Noah. And if there was ever someone who held on tightly, it was Noah. He had only this naked promise that God would bring him through an extremely strenuous, life-threatening challenge. Think about it. Noah did not give up on hope, even though everything he had known in his life was being destroyed. That's why that song, again, that was picked out, I have lost everything for you. Noah literally lost everything. The story of Noah was so dramatic, really so much like dynamite, and powerful that Jesus referred to Noah and the times that Noah went through as an emotional way to feel the times that will be there before Jesus comes back. And I think myself, I feel this worldwide turbulence all around me today. I feel it. When I'm living in Bad Cannstatt, there's a feel of things turbulent going on, even in my neighborhood. Even in the city of Stuttgart, even in the area of Germany and the rest of Europe and around the world, there's this turbulence everywhere, extremities happening. Every corner in the world seems to be touched by events that shake everything up. Noah felt his times personally. He felt the turbulence. But in the midst of it, he heard God speaking to him with a saving message. And there's our beginning of our hope as well. Even in our turbulent times, we have ears to hear a saving message that God has for us. I think we can say amen to that, can't we? Yeah, yeah. Our ears don't have to be plugged. We can try to open them up in the midst of the turbulence. And you know, Noah was totally dependent upon God in this story. He believed that God would keep his promise to save him, and that alone gave him hope. And because he believed that, what did he do? He went and built this huge boat called an ark. No one had ever done that before. He built it because of God. Noah collected all the animals because of God. Noah did all the rest of the organizational work because of God. Noah entered the ark because of God. And then there was the great wait. It seems to me this was the hardest part of the Noah story. This waiting. To be active is one thing. I mean, if we have a problem and we can do something active, I know the men here are all for picking up the hammer and going after the problem and solve it, work at it, do something active, but waiting? Inactivity? Noah had entered the boat as the rain began to fall and God shut the door, and there was no turning back. Sometimes we have options. When Alfred and I were going to get married on our wedding day, Jerry Johnson was the pastor who married us. We had known him, Alfred had known him as his first pastor back in Frankfurt in the days when he was growing up. And so Jerry Johnson was there with Alfred in the back part of the church, or actually the front part, the sacristy. He was right there, and the door was shut, and the whole service was about to begin, and there was a door that was open. And Jerry Johnson had a lot of humor, and so he said to Alfred, probably in a serious tone, "This is your last chance to leave if you want to." And that threw my husband off. You'd have to know Alfred to know that something like that would be like hitting him with a cold fish in the face. He didn't know what to do with it. But that was Jerry Johnson's bit of humor, saying, okay, this is your chance. The door's still open. You don't have to commit. How do we do with commitment when we enter the ark, the modern ark known as the church? Do we make some kind of a commitment that says the door is now shut? I've made my commitment, no turning back, no turning back? Interesting question. But a decision on Noah's part was such that he went in, the door was shut, and there was no turning back. The door wasn't going to let anybody else in either at that point in time. And I think there must have been lots of shouting and banging on the door by the people who saw what was happening to them as the rain began to fall. I mean, I think we can understand some of the work of the ark. When you think of the ark, the pictures I've seen, there's only a slot for air around the whole ark. There's no big windows. It's not like he had a bay window to look out at everything. Once Noah went into the boat, he was kind of hermeneutically sealed off. But he couldn't see all of the destruction happening, but he certainly could hear it. There was only enough air for later to let out the birds that let him know that it was almost time for the door to be opened. But Noah didn't see all of this destruction as it took place, but fearful things were heard outside, and the rain was pounding on the roof. I sometimes have heard people say, the story of Noah can't be true. How can that much rain fall to flood everything? I think we have a pretty good idea of what that looks like in our day. If the amount of rain that has fallen in some places that have created the flooding in Slovenia, in Austria, and other places on the planet, would fall for 40 days and 40 nights, good luck. There is enough rain capacity for filling places so full that it seems like everything is full of water. Fearful things were happening to him. And he could hear the pounding of the rain on the roof as well, and so there was a lot of awe in the story. I mean, being in this ark with his family and all these different animals, and then feeling like there's nothing I can do, and everything that I've known before is now gone. It has been washed away. His previous life was gone. And we've seen this in some of the anguish you hear. For example, the people in the area in Turkey and in Syria where the earthquake was, everything they ever had is gone. You see that in pictures in Hawaii this past week. Everything they ever had, James was telling me of his uncle and aunt and somebody else that lives there, everything is gone. Their whole previous life, whoosh, in a matter of minutes, if you get right down to it. Or I was hearing a story of one of the victims of the explosion in Beirut, Lebanon, and that was last week, was the 3-year anniversary. There was a family, a couple that had a 3-year-old daughter that was just whooshed away in this explosion, lost her life at 3. And the family still is facing the rubble of a life turned on its head. And Beirut, Lebanon has not improved. And then we could think of other pictures. There's been flooding in Japan and China as well as in Western Europe and other places. Human life, the sustaining of it, is not a given. We cannot take things for granted, can we? I mean, I think, well, nothing's going to happen like that to me. Don't you think that way? I'm in a safe place. Do you ever have that feeling like, well, we're in a safe place? Are we? Well, what can be done in the waiting? Noah could only live in hope because he trusted that God would keep his promise. Trust only becomes a robust trust when put to the test, doesn't it? I mean, you can talk about trust all you want to if you never have to trust. I mean, I got a WhatsApp from somebody this week and said, how come it is that so-and-so, and she was from Africa, doesn't live in Stuttgart anymore, she always has trust. Where did all of this come from? And I said, well, I don't know everything, but many places on the earth, you have to trust God for some real basic stuff. When was the last time we trusted God for a meal? To know how to pay groceries. I mean, we've got a little more acquainted with electricity bills and stuff. But the existential needs, we figure, well, they'll get worked out. How did your trust get developed anyway if you never have to trust? It's an interesting question, something we can reflect on. But I think if we want a robust trust, we're going to have to realize it will be then put to the test to see how robust it is. Noah was in this rocking ark, floating uncertainly. I think that's why we get this picture, hold on tight. Who knows what kind of whooshing back and forth. I might have been seasick, actually, in that thing. There was no motor, and there was no way that he could steer the boat in any way. He was not the captain of this ark. He had no control over it. He had to trust that God would not let them sink or crash, but bring them through safely. Therefore, hold on tight. The temptation, of course, is to let faith and hope slip through our fingers in times of duress and exceptional stress. Faith then becomes a little shaky, and we might kind of lose things in that moment. Waiting out the storms is only possible when we hold on tight to the promises of God's presence and his words of deliverance. So trust means hold on tight. So if you forget everything else, think hold on tight. Remember the story of Jesus and his disciples when they were out in their boat story. And they started out calmly, but all of a sudden a huge wind came down from the mountain area and frothed up all of the waves. and they had rain and a fierce storm and wind and waves and higher until the waves were in their boat, and it was a felt threat. They felt it. They got wet with the threat. And the disciples thought, of course, this is it. We're all going to drown. So they went over to Jesus, who was sleeping, and they woke him up and shouted at him for fear, "Save us, Lord." And of course, what did Jesus do? He said, "Wind, waves, will you just chill?" And it calmed down, and they were all safe. And Jesus says, "Why are you afraid? You have so little faith." That seems always astounding to us because we think we would have been full of fear too. Well, the disciples were learning who Jesus was, and I think that's how we all are. Faith would grow. But in the story here of Noah, he held on tight to the promise God had given him. He nurtured hope by a confidence that God would keep his promise. And this story was well known to those believers there. The listeners understood. They connected the dots when they were reminded, let us hold tightly without wavering to the hope we affirm, for God can be trusted to keep his promise. And so I don't know what you are going through in your life. What kind of turbulence are you feeling? What kinds of challenges are coming your way? What kind of promises has God given to you? In the midst of the stress and the struggle and the dimensions of life that don't fit together, hold on tight to the promises God has given you, and let that nurture in you the hope you need to live. For without hope, we cannot live. So what's the word for today? The 3 words you take with you? Hold on tight. And all the people said, amen. And we're going to sing one fun song at the end of the service now.